To His Grace Bishop Errenous Russell-McCloud, presiding prelate, Lady Patricia Russell-McCloud, Esquire, Episcopal Supervisor, Dr. Sharon Smith Banks, Episcopal District President of the WMS, Dr. Lenore Brogdon, Episcopal District Lay Organization President, Sister Sheila Floyd, Episcopal District Director of the YPD, Licentiate Andrew Coleman, Episcopal District President of the YPD, Sister Marsha Washington, Conference WMS President, Sister Nelson, Conference President, Lay Organization, to my presiding elder, Reverend Thomas H. Fant, presiding elder of the Allegheny Scranton District, Reverend Alton Bennett Dillard, presiding elder of the Pittsburgh, West Virginia District, Reverend Madonna Gray, our host pastor, and the Reverend Dr. James Henderson Harris, our host pastor on location. Lastly, to the members of Ebenezer African Methodist Episcopal Church, the laity, the members, the visitors, the friends, and the Fellowship of the Prophets, the prognosticating and proletarious pastors of the 155th session of the Pittsburgh West by God, Virginia Annual Conference. Turn with me, if you will, to 1 Samuel, the 30th chapter, verses 9 through 20, reading from the Berean Study Bible. So David and his 600 men went to the brook of Bezah, where some stayed behind, because 200 men were too exhausted to cross the brook. But David and 400 men continued in pursuit. Now his men found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David. They gave the man water to drink and food to eat, a piece of a fig cake and 2 clusters of raisins. So he ate and was revived. So he had not had any food or water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David asked him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" "I am an Egyptian," he replied, "slave of an Amalekite. My master abandoned me 3 days ago when I fell ill. We raided the Negev of the Chetherites, the territory of Judah, and the Negev of Caleb, and we burned down Ziklag. Will you lead me to these raiders?" David asked. And the man replied, "Swear to me by God that you will not kill me or deliver me into the hand of my master, and I will lead you to them." So he led David down, and there were the Amalekites spread out all over the land, eating, drinking, and celebrating the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistine and the land of Judah. And David struck them down from twilight until the evening of the next day. Not a man escaped, except 400 young men who fled riding on camels. So David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken, including his 2 wives. Nothing was missing, young or old, son or daughter, or any other plunder the Amalekites had taken. David brought everything back, and he recovered all the flocks and herds which his men drove ahead of the other livestock, calling out, "This is David's plunder." I want to use for a subject an unyielding endurance and the tragedy of exhaustion. An unyielding endurance and the tragedy of exhaustion. Kindly, God, set me behind the cross that I might see thee at thy work. All of thee, Lord, and none of me. Amen. With only 3 months left until the conclusion of 2022, I hazard a hunch that I am not the only one who has already begun to do a mental inventory of the things, events, and lessons learned during these past 10 months. I believe it is safe to say that 2022, in comparison to last year, has not in any way, shape, form, or fashion turned out as we'd expected. So much has happened during the course of this year, and with only 3 months left, I think it would be prudent for us to look at our inventory list of things, events, and lessons learned and begin developing a posture of appreciation. Even in the midst of the unknown, God has seen fit to not only keep us amid danger, sickness, financial distress, death, racism, violence, and yes, a global pandemic, but God has done so provisionally, proactively, and providentially. Here we are at the close of another conference year. Pastors and leaders having to confront the pressures of social injustice, financial worry, pandemic, and outbreaks, while at the same time trying to preach faith, hope, and love in a faithless, hopeless, and loveless society. It was seen that things that we have endured and yet continue to face is a poignant reflection that gives life to Amira Barak's The Changing Same, who said, "We are bodies responding differently, a total force like against you. You react to push it, recreate it, resist it. It is the opposite pressure, producing in this case the sound, the music." Still, brothers and sisters, the music of 2022 is not the sound of joy, laughter, love, or even peace. It is the sound of struggle, the moans of grief, the wails of despair, and the muted tones and bated breath as we patiently await what lies ahead. Life. What is it about life that seems so hard to understand? What is it about life that can appear as constant as the sun, yet ebbs and flows with uncertain ease? Mahoko Yoshimoto, a famed Japanese writer, suggests in the uncertain ebb and flow of time and emotions, much of one's life's history is etched in the senses. The things that we encounter that causes us to feel whatever the emotion, and that forces us to connect both faith and self in the same breath, teaches us how to handle the things that life throws at us. Furthermore, be it happenstance or by design, life and all of life's issues helps us to determine when to apply unyielding endurance or to feel the weight of our exhaustion. The poet laureate of the Negro race, Sir Paul Laurence Dunbar, said, "A crust of bread and a corner to sleep in, a minute to smile and an hour to weep in, a pint of joy to a peck of trouble, and never a laugh, but the moans come double, and that's life. A crust and a corner that love make precious, with a smile to warm and the tears to refresh us, and joy seems sweeter when cares come out there, and a moan is the finest of foils for laughter, and that is life." Things that happen in life often fall within two categories: happenstance or design. The things that we as pastors and leaders have collectively faced, much of it will fit into the category of design. Pastoring these 2.5 years for most has led many to redesign their methodology for meeting the needs of the people, trying to inspire and excite folk whose cares and concerns for returning back to public worship is both real and necessary. Yet the difficulty that most have had to endure has been trying to find ways to remain relevant without sacrificing everything we know and love about the church. March 2022, 42% of pastors considered resigning, a 13% increase from January 2021. Although they cited reasons of immense stress, feelings of isolation, loneliness, and political division. The weight of trying to produce positive and impactful ministry while at the same time struggling and exhausted lives the words of the hymn, "And are we yet alive to see each other's face?" Many of us were exhausted simply trying to make it to this point let alone trying to create ministries and meet needs while combating COVID-19, the variants, and monkeypox. Nevertheless, the struggle of the church has a duality to it. Pastors and lay leaders have had to contend with low pay and high exposure to suffering, problems that were compounded by the pandemic. The efficacy of preaching, pastoring, and serving, especially in this social climate, sustains the reality of an exhausted church. 468 mass shootings, 1,044 people killed by police, poverty, race violence, voter suppression, voter intimidation, the U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade, and the growing humanitarian crisis and conflicts the world over. Without question, the world is struggling with the inability to be human. Our resistance to change has long enough reminded us of what the ancient philosopher Plutarch said: character is simply habit long continued. All of these things, events, and lessons learned in 2022 has been by design. But sweet children, don't be fooled. God is in no ways shocked, caught off guard, or intimidated by the happenings of this year. We were shocked. We were caught off guard. We were made timid by what is taking place, yet in the throes of it all, we're left to ponder the meaning of an unyielding endurance and the tragedy of exhaustion. The text: consider the past as you contemplate the future. 1 Samuel 29 paints a picture of David's trouble in the air of content that leads to his misfortune. Leaving Aphek, the Philistines develop a mistrust of David, who accompanies both them and Achish to Jezreel. David's fame and exploits are known. Songs are sung in his honor. Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. David, a successful mercenary for hire, a fugitive of Israel, and a military strategist, has a well-earned reputation that causes pause for those in his present company. Fearful that in the midst of battle, David may suffer from temporary frets of loyalty, the Philistines demand that Achish send David and his 600 men back to Ziklag. Next morning, David and his men travel the 47 miles from Aphek to Ziklag, discover that their homes have been burned to the ground and their women and children taken hostage. The Amalekites, a nomadic tribe of formidable people, who first arrived on the scene when they attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Descendants of Amalek, the grandson of Esau. They were uncivilized people, wastelanders, if you will. They dwelt in the Sinai Peninsula and the Negev. After several losses in battle with Israel, they were temporarily driven back to the Sinai wilderness. These godless people waged in barbaric guerrilla warfare with Israel, and because of their barbarism, God ordered Saul to exterminate them and everything connected to them. Due to Saul's disobedience, David finds himself faced with the remnants of Saul's failures. I think I ought to tell you that some of us as pastors have been faced with the remnants of work undone by the previous pastor. Lay folks have been faced with the work undone by the previous leader in their posts. Stay on your notes, Reverend. Back in Ziklag, what's supposed to have been a homecoming turns into a tragedy. David suffers a double blow. First, he finds the city sacked and burned to the ground. Make matters worse, all of the women and children are gone. Secondly, men turn on him and threaten to kill him. Possibly the men could have been angry over the fact that the town was left unguarded, or it could have been the response of emotionally drained and physically exhausted men scapegoating leadership. Situation here is a reminder of the hazards of responsible leadership and also how fickle human nature can be. Much like the plight of African Americans today, The Bob Johnsons, the cubes of ice, and the $50 too often think that their success in life makes them equal to their white counterparts. They suffer from Trumpian accumulated affluenza, yet fail to realize that they will never be accepted by members of the White Citizens Council, I mean the Republican Party. While they sing and dance to the same tune as our struggle, they behind our backs make deals with our oppressors. David, who was usually the object of their hero worship, become the source of their anger and frustration. Conference, isn't it funny how in the span of a moment, you can be the object of affection and in the next, the source of people's discontent? I tell you, Jesus found himself in the same quandary, a similar situation, when on Palm Sunday, the people shouted, Hosanna, but in the span of a few hours, they called for his crucifixion. Again, these things fall into the same category of design. God is not surprised by what is going on, neither is God without a remedy for our trouble. Emotionally hurt, physically exhausted, wrongly accused, David resorts to what he knows best. He prays. Just like when he was in a bind with Jonathan, David learned then what he is aware of now. Instead of trying to handle the situation on your own, you ought to pray about it. When facing tough situation, make it a habit to seek God first. When we make God our first response instead of our last resort, it becomes easier to turn to God when in a crisis. I tell you, too often in ministry, pastors and leaders, we find ourselves reeling from the effects of happenstance and design. We find ourselves suffering from failed attempts at doing successful ministry, trying to appease people, but not doing too much or moving too fast. We encounter conflicts with people whose exhaustion spills over onto the congregation, congregants whose faith has been tried and tested by the myriad of concerns, constant bills, but a lack of resources, an abundance of work, but a lack of volunteers, visions of something different, but held hostage by the past. That's not how we used to do it. All of these things, they weary us, they tire us, they exhaust us, but God doesn't call us to easy and overnight success. God calls us to endure the difficulty of service by seeking God with intentional prayer, by being faithful in the midst of faithlessness, by staying on the wall, even if you have to stand by yourself. I tell you, God calls us to hold up the bloodstained banner, even if we have to hold it up till we die. God calls us in the midst of our exhaustion to have hope, H-O-P-E, holding on, praying, and expecting. Expecting what? Expecting God to show up when God says he's coming. In South Carolina, we used to sing a song, When I Need Him Most. Jesus steps right in when I need him the most. A lesson in specificity. After dealing with his men's treacherous behavior, David seeks God. Verse 8 says, David prays and asks, shall I pursue this troop and shall I overtake? Here's a lesson about prayer. Being specific leads to clarity and understanding when contemplating your next move. The assurance of God only makes sense when we fulfill what God says. Be not faithless, but faithful. The want of success pales in comparison to the actual pursuit of being successful. Things remain the same and situations go unresolved so long as we are content with the idea of being successful. In David's case, being victorious over his enemies and regaining the respect of his men was essential to his need for clarity and understanding through prayer. After David prayed, the word of the Lord was as clear as his request. Verse 8, pursue For you will surely overtake them, and you will surely rescue all. A polemical point here is that the methods of communicating with God have changed. Since Jesus, we are privileged to inquire of God the matters of the heart and mind without the use of symbols and signs. Faith in God brings about signs and wonders, which serves as a response to prayers answered. David pursues. He takes his 600 men, heads down toward Bezabrook with a promise of success. This is the look of unyielding endurance. Despite the severity of the situation and regardless of the odds against you, you press your way forward. The tragedy of exhaustion is when you allow what is happening to you and around you, stopping you from succeeding, and those getting inside your head, putting you in your feelings and obfuscating your vision. While your exhaustion is not without merit, too often we allow how we temporarily feel to stop us from doing what needs to be done. 47-mile journey from Aphek to Ziklag speaks to their exhaustion. The 13 additional miles to Bezabrook makes their exhaustion a reality. Multiply that with the emotional and mental fatigue of what happened and the uncertainty of both their families and the outcome of battle. This gives rise to the 200's inability to move forward. David is seen here as a military strategist in that he finds purpose in their exhaustion. David, who is being driven by divine strength, shows compassion for the 200, leads them to guard the baggage and the camp, which in turn frees up the 400 men that are left and their horses from additional weight. Note here, their staying behind represents both a physical and an emotional need, but also a spiritual one as well. When your mind is clouded by other things, I said when your mind is clouded by other things, you become incapable of receiving and carrying out instructions. Let me speak to the leaders for a minute. The tragedy of exhaustion is visibly clear. While we feel how we feel, sometimes as leaders, we are called to forsake how we feel in the moment, to focus on big picture. For the cause of Christ, we are not always afforded the time, Dr. Harris, needed to lick our wounds. Sometimes we have to fight through the pain. Sometimes we have to look past the tears. Sometimes you have to move in spite of the fear and believe beyond the capacity to understand. Come here, pastors. Sometimes the people won't understand the vision. Sometimes the people leave you standing by yourself. Sometimes it's just us. But I came to the 155th session of the Pittsburgh West by God, Virginia annual conference to tell somebody you plus God still makes a difference. Come in, lay folks. People, pastors are human. We make mistakes. We get it wrong sometimes. We can be emotional sometimes. We don't always say it right sometimes. We get tired sometimes. But in the church, God doesn't call shepherds without sheep. In the church, God doesn't just use the preacher. In the church, everybody is commanded to praise and worship God. Don't push me, Andrew. I ain't there yet. If you choose to quit, if you choose to give up, if you choose to give in to your exhaustion, who then will lead us? Come here, Black America. The tragedy of our communal exhaustion is real. 2022 has been rough on us. While fighting for our lives against the novel coronavirus, we still had to fight police brutality, white supremacy, and celebrated racism. As much as things have changed, much of the change has been less desired. Question today becomes, is it the fighting same, or is it the changing same? The elements of our oppression and struggle remain the same. Racism, voter suppression, bold intimidation, empty political rhetoric. But saints, we've come up through hard trials and tribulation, wiping tears with hurt and tired hands. Yet that's life. And we will continue to be our reality so long as we remain exhausted. Brothers and sisters, somebody has to be like David and say, fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity, for they shall soon be cut down like the grass, wither as the green herb. You're exhausted from pastoring and leading people. You're exhausted from being the only person the pastor can depend on. You're exhausted from the same old game of struggle. You're exhausted from the political lies and promises that never come to fruition. But if we let our exhaustion from the political foolishness and the only person being able to be called on, if we let our exhaustion get the best of us, then what will become of the people of God? Well, let's land this plane. I feel myself clocking out. Pursue, overtake, recover. Before David and the 400 crossed the brook, they stumbled upon a half-dying and sick Egyptian who was an abandoned slave of the Amalekites. Starving, dehydrated, possibly delirious, David and his men show him some compassion. Feed him 2 cakes of figs and 2 clusters of raisins, and the text says his spirit is then revived. Once alert, the Egyptians become a wonderful source of information for David and his men. Not only was he an eyewitness to what the Amalekites did at Ziklag, he also knows the direction in which they were headed, but reluctantly refuses to talk until David swears not to kill him. Sweet children, God provides for us that which we cannot do for ourselves. When we are motivated by Christian charity, with disregard to the severity of our own need, God motivates us. In pursuit, David and his men could have ignored the dying Egyptian, but due to their concern, they found what they needed, and all it costed them was a little bit of Christian charity. Using the information given, they found the Amalekites drunk in celebration. David and his men overtook them, recovered everything they had lost, including their wives and children. David's recovery was so large, it was more than enough to send to the 13 cities in Judah. It was David's unyielding endurance that led him to pursue, overtake, and recover. He could have allowed the circumstances before him to diminish his faith. Yet in the midst of exhaustion, mutiny, and grief, he prayed about it. Like his men, he lost his 2 wives. Like his men, he lost his children. Like his men, he lost his home. Like his men, he was tired from the journey, spent with emotion and fuming with anger, but he prayed about it. Prayer will give you strength when strength is in short supply. Prayer will keep you when all around you, everyone and everything is falling apart. Prayer will give clarity to a troubled mind, bring peace into a confused situation, and resolution in the midst of chaos. Sweet children, God calls us to pastor, to actively lead people, to lead ministry, serve people, pray for people, love people who are sometimes hard to love while exhausted. Yet still we are called to endure suffering, to endure struggles, to endure heartbreaks, disappointments, failed and foiled plans at the expense of being exhausted. Work of ministry and pastoring is a selfish reality, not unto those that are called, but because of those who've been called by God to the work and the arduous weight of carrying. Our journey to Ziklag is exhausting. Ziklag is sometimes a tragedy, but on the way to recovery, God leads us to a Bezah brook, a place where we can collect our strength, regain our focus, renew our faith, a place where we can rest from all the things that exhaust us. Then there are those whose strength is strengthened in the doing. Some of us are reinvigorated. Some of us are inspired. Some of us are motivated by the things that exhaust us. And we discover in our faithful pursuit the awful grace of God. Aeschylus, the Greek tragedian and father of tragedy, said, even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until in our own despair, against our own will comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. Until you have experienced the burden of exhaustion, until you have suffered the gripping pains of trying to uphold your calling and sacred vows, until you have given up yourself like the pelican bird who pecks his chest when he has nothing else to feed his babies, then will you know the joys of unyielding endurance. Until you have sat with the sweet torture of Sunday morning, says Dr. Gardner Calvin Taylor, you will never know the God who gives endurance only the tragedy of exhaustion. Unless I leave you half full, we sometimes exhaust ourselves in the pursuits and actions that aren't God ordained. We exhaust ourselves by responding to things that don't deserve a response. We exhaust ourselves by chasing after members whose actions are clear concerning their obligation. We exhaust ourselves by fulfilling roles and jockeying for positions God ain't called us to. We exhaust ourselves by trying to do ministries that make us look good, but denies the glory of God. We are sometimes exhausted because of overzealous and self-aggrandizing actions that too often overshadow God's will and purpose. Sweet children, hear me, in your Ziklag moments, in your Bezabrook moments, in your exhaustion moments, be like David. But David found strength in the Lord his God. Then David said to Abiathar the priest, the son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. Abiathar brought it to him. David inquired of the Lord, shall I pursue this raiding party? Will I overtake them? Pursue them, he answered. You will certainly overtake them and succeed in the rescue. Saints, all I'm trying to tell you is that sometimes giving into your exhaustion is a tragedy. Sometimes God orchestrates trouble in our lives so that what's already within us can be strengthened through faith and our willingness to endure. Come on, Andrew, let's ride. It's hard, but you can make it. It's heavy, but God can carry the load. You feel abandoned, but God is with you. It's difficult, but it'll get better. You feel lonely. You feel exhausted. You want to throw in the towel. But saints, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight that's in the dog. It looks bad. Life has exhausted you, but endure. Problems has exhausted you. Sickness and death has exhausted you, but endure. COVID-19, politics and people, they have exhausted you, but endure. Don't lose your hope. Never give up your faith. Hold on to what you know, and by God endure. The Bible declares weeping may endure for a night, but joy, I said joy, joy cometh in the morning. I heard Isaiah say, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, shall mount up wings like an eagle. They shall run and not get weary. They shall walk and shall not faint. I'm through now, children. May the Lord bless you real good. But on my way back to Aliquippa, I just want to tell you, if when you give the best of your service, telling the world the Savior has come, be not dismayed when men don't believe you. He'll understand and say, well done. But if you try and fail in your trying, hands are sore from the work you begun. Take up your cross, run swiftly to meet him. He'll understand, he'll understand, he'll understand and say, well done. I got to quit now. I feel all right here. I want to ask you just one little question. If you don't mind, answer me back. Ain't the Lord, ain't he all right? Say it, say it, say yes. Won't he make a way? Won't he open up doors? Won't he move mountains? Elevate your level ground. Give you life in dry time. Won't he hold your hand? Won't he wipe your tears? Won't he pay your bills? Won't he heal your body? Won't he do it? Say it. Yeah! Yeah!